We've gone through the briefing documents, the policy memos, and all the expert analyses that really define the moment the calendar flipped to 2026. And what those sources show, it's not a world just stumbling into the future. It's a world being aggressively and I'd say meticulously rebuilt. Welcome to the deep dive.
Our mission today is to give you the ultimate shortcut to understanding these opening gambits. We're unpacking this shift from global ambiguity to what the sources are calling strategic consolidation. Think of it like this. The world's major players, the US, China, Russia, the BRICS bloc, they're all sitting down for a nonstop high-stakes game of poker. And we are analyzing the very first hands they just laid on the table.
That poker analogy is spot on. I think what truly defines this moment, and the sources all point to this, is the death of strategic ambiguity.
Right.
That whole era of, flexible, open-ended global relationships, it's over. It's being replaced by strategic certainty where every single move, every diplomatic visit, every economic policy is calculated to reinforce one's own bloc and to isolate the others. Okay, so let's look at the first move on the board. It always involves Washington and Beijing, doesn't it? Starting with the U.S., we're seeing this transition in major cities like the administrative changeover in New York. But the real strategic shift is global. The Trump administration is signaling a fundamental change in priorities. They're reallocating domestic security resources toward what they are labeling hemispheric resilience.
Now, that phrase, hemispheric resilience, is just crucial. It is not just a buzzword for border security.
No.
It signals a strategic withdrawal of focus from certain areas abroad to deeply fortify the Americas. The goal here is ensuring economic and supply chain security close to home. It's Fortress America becoming an operational reality.
And that domestic posture shift is immediately countered across the Pacific. What did the reports flag about President Xi's move?
What's fascinating here is President Xi Jinping's profound rhetorical pivot. His major address was all focused on global governance 2.0.
Yeah.
And he's not framing China as some revolutionary challenger trying to tear down the system. He's framing China as the primary pillar of stability.
Stability, that's what everyone claims they want, but what does that mean in practice?
It means China is positioning itself as the default coordinator, the anchor for the entire global South. If the U.S. is pulling back to focus on its hemisphere, China is stepping right in to manage the rest of the world's complexity. And that's a truly consequential rhetorical move. It changes who the developing world sees as its most reliable partner.
And that brings us directly into this concept of blocization you mentioned. The global South is not waiting around. India has just officially assumed the rotating presidency of the BRICS grouping. And their 2026 roadmap is already out. Resilience and innovation.
This is exactly where we see blocization being formalized in finance. The primary goal of that roadmap is to finalize the transition toward a diversified multi-currency payment system. They're not just talking about bilateral trade in local currencies anymore. The actual mechanism for a shared payment infrastructure is moving into final testing phases.
That sounds like a powerful signal, but let's be realistic. What's the timeline for something like that to truly compete with the dollar, with its overwhelming liquidity and global acceptance? Is this a genuine shift, or is it mostly political messaging?
Well, the analysts are saying it's both. It's a message, absolutely, but it's a message that's backed by critical commodities. The expanded BRICS plus bloc now controls a huge percentage of the world's rare earth mineral production, the inputs for all modern technology. And they are pushing to formalize this thing called the BRICS Mineral Security Partnership.
So it's not just about currency. It's about controlling the industrial inputs of the future.
Exactly. And if you connect the dots, this move is a direct formal response to the U.S.-led Mineral Security Finance Network. This tit-for-tat BRICS securing their materials, the West securing theirs. This signals the definitive end of globalization as we knew it. Economic influence is now defined by secure, bloc-specific supply chains, not by, maximizing open market efficiency.
Right. That secure supply chain idea immediately brings up the friction points. Where are they? So let's transition into that. Let's look at where these consolidating blocs are actively maneuvering against each other. And we start again with the U.S. and China, specifically in the economic and maritime corridor.
On the economic front, the U.S. Treasury Department kicked off the year by implementing a new series of targeted economic realignments. And it's really crucial to understand these are fundamentally different from the tariffs we saw in previous years.
How so? What's the insight there?
The insight is that Washington isn't trying to slow down China's general economy anymore. They're trying to surgically remove its ability to produce the next generation of critical technology. We're talking high-end semiconductors, AI chips. These realignments are structural decoupling measures. They're meant to isolate specific supply chains and make China dependent on its own indigenous production, which might be years away from parity.
And China's reaction on the maritime front was instantaneous
Right.
and very muscular.
It was. The People's Liberation Army Navy responded with major live fire drills in the South China Sea. Beijing framed it as a response to external volatility. Analysts see this as a classic high-cost denial strategy. China's making the price of a sustained U.S. presence in that region, operationally and diplomatically, as expensive as possible. They're hardening their operational theater, pushing back on this idea of unfettered Western access.
So you have the U.S. surgically isolating tech and China hardening its defense perimeter. But the U.S. isn't just focused on the Pacific. They're making a forceful countermove in their own hemisphere, too. Tell us about the security quarantine on Venezuelan energy.
This is a textbook application of what the sources are calling Monroe Doctrine 2.0. The goal is pure energy gatekeeping. The mechanism is a coordinated blend of secondary sanctions and naval monitoring. And it's all aimed at one thing: ensuring that Venezuelan oil flows are directed toward Western markets.
So is this about denying revenue to Venezuela, or is it specifically about denying access to rivals?
It is absolutely the latter. The explicit goal is to keep Venezuelan oil away from extraterritorial actors. It's about securing the western flank of the energy supply. It makes it crystal clear that Washington retains leverage over resource flows in its own backyard, which directly counters any Chinese or Russian attempts to secure long-term access there.
That focus on securing physical flows brings us to where things get really creative. Part 3. How new geopolitical corridors are being physically built and financially leapfrogged to bypass the old power centers. Let's start with this physical expansion championed by the U.S. The Trump administration brokered a diplomatic and infrastructure corridor between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Analysts are already calling it the Trump route.
And the significance of this corridor is, well, it's monumental. It provides a Western-aligned transit path from the Caspian Sea all the way to the Mediterranean. And critically, it successfully bypasses two key powers, Russia to the north and Iran to the south.
That sounds incredibly complex politically.
Yeah.
And logistically expensive. How are the sources framing the immediate impact?
They're framing it as a major strategic expansion into Eurasia that already has tangible economic results. Energy flow through this corridor, if we're talking oil and gas, is expected to jump by 40% in 2026 alone. It's a deliberate Western attempt to secure alternative energy routes that are completely independent of Moscow or Tehran.
Meanwhile, Russia is playing a much longer game, focusing on what they call sovereign endurance. And Moscow is signaling renewed attention on the Arctic Silk Road.
This is a classic case of climate change creating a geopolitical opportunity. Melting ice has turned this northern route into a viable alternative to the Suez Canal, a route that's proven to be pretty volatile, right? So Russia, in partnership with China, is moving fast to secure the logistics, the icebreaker fleets, the port infrastructure, everything needed to make this the next great global shipping path.
But the shipping season is still limited, and the capital required is just staggering. Is the Arctic Silk Road a realistic alternative right now, or is it more of a threat meant to keep rivals guessing?
For large-scale, year-round use, it is still future-oriented, but the investment signals certainty. But, while these physical corridors are being built, the financial corridors are being constructed even faster. Beijing's countermove to Western financial dominance is the digital renminbi expansion.
And the catalyst for that expansion is critical, isn't it?
Absolutely. A new agreement has just gone into effect between China and Saudi Arabia, and it allows for the first time for the settlement of a significant amount of their oil trades in digital yuan instead of dollars.
That one agreement, as small as it might seem, sounds like it could be the spark for massive structural change.
It is. This agreement is driving what analysts are calling the bifurcation of the global financial system.
Yeah.
You now have two distinct global trading spheres, one relying on the traditional dollarized system, and the other actively using non-dollar mechanisms for critical commodities like oil. It forces central banks and corporations everywhere to hedge their bets.
And finally, we can't overlook the high-stakes technological leapfrog happening, the part designed to maintain parity. Russia has successfully integrated new autonomous delivery systems into its strategic deterrent, which they're calling the Burevestnik factor.
The Burevestnik factor refers to the successful integration of their nuclear-powered autonomous systems. You could think of them as long-range underwater drones. And Russia is framing this not as an escalation, but as a necessary strategic balance to the U.S. developing these advanced hypersonic interceptors. It just goes to show that while the economic war is focused on trade and currency, the strategic deterrent balance is still entirely driven by cutting-edge technology.
So what does this aggressive, bifurcating global landscape mean for the Western industrial base? That takes us to our final part here, looking at the immediate U.S. domestic policy implications and the global context. Washington has doubled down on industrial policy through what's being referred to simply as the Big Beautiful Bill.
This is a landmark piece of legislation, no question. It's already resulted in the documented reshoring of over 200 manufacturing facilities in just the first half of the decade. But the real inflection point is today. As of January 1st, 2026, massive new tax credits for hemispheric production have officially kicked in.
So what's the underlying economic principle here? What's driving this massive expenditure?
The sources are unanimous on this. This policy fundamentally changes the economic calculus for every company. The priority is no longer securing the cheapest price. It is securing the most reliable, trusted source. The old concept of just-in-time delivery, which defined the last 30 years of globalization, is being aggressively replaced by just-in-case stockpiling. The global economy is literally being re-engineered for source security, not for price efficiency.
But that focus on building up domestic manufacturing, while it sounds strategically sound for the U.S., must be creating some serious friction within the Western alliance itself.
Oh, absolutely. We see Bulgaria's adoption of the euro today, which is a signal of Eurozone resilience. But internally, the debate in the EU on strategic autonomy for their defense industry is reaching a boiling point. France and Germany are deeply concerned that this massive U.S. industrial blitz, these huge subsidies and tax credits, will effectively hollow out European manufacturing. It could redirect crucial capital and production straight across the Atlantic.
And Beijing is keenly aware of this internal tension.
They are actively exploiting that wedge. A high-level Chinese delegation is scheduled to visit Paris and Berlin to discuss green technology partnerships later this month. It's a perfectly timed move, aimed directly at leveraging that friction and presenting China as a stable partner in key high-tech sectors where the U.S. is trying to dominate.
And shifting to Africa, we're seeing the BRICS influence expand significantly as an alternative to those traditional Western institutions.
That's right. The African Union's continental free trade area is seeing its highest levels of internal trade ever. And crucially, this trade is largely being funded by BRICS development loans channeled through the BRICS Bank. This expansion is forcing Western-led institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, to fundamentally reconsider and, frankly, soften their historically strict lending criteria. The Western monopoly on development finance is being actively eroded by a deep-pocketed alternative.
Okay, let's just quickly connect this back to the Middle East, which was in some of the supplementary sources.
Right. The sources noted the 6-month continuation of an uneasy peace in Gaza, brokered by a U.S. and Arab coalition. Saudi Arabia is using this critical window to accelerate its Vision 2030 nuclear energy goals. The U.S. is offering civilian technology, but this comes with a very clear string attached. The kingdom must remain fully aligned with the petrodollar system. So it's a period of intense leverage and consolidation, all about securing oil flows and strategic alignment.
So as we synthesize this whole deep dive into the opening moves of 2026, the roles feel very clear, defined by these calculated first steps. The U.S. is focused on Fortress America and reshoring. China is the self-appointed stabilizer of the global South. Russia is playing for technological parity and buying time. And India, at the helm of BRICS, is asserting itself as the new center of gravity for the developing world.
The conclusion is pretty stark. The era of a single, highly interconnected global system is fading, and it's fading fast. It's being replaced by clearly defined, highly coordinated, and competing spheres of influence. We are literally watching the tectonic plates of geopolitics shift in real time, and every policy move is an earthquake in miniature.
And this constant movement, according to analysts, is the greatest risk of 2026. It's not a single catastrophic headline event, but the long-term, compounding, incremental volatility caused by these constantly shifting plates. These small, calculated moves that eventually add up to massive, irreversible systemic change.
So, as you process this shift, here's a final thought to consider. Of all these newly formalized partnerships and corridors, the digital renminbi oil trades, the BRICS mineral partnership, that new Armenian-Azerbaijani route, which one will show the first major sign of diplomatic or economic strain in the coming months? Because that eventual crack will tell us where the new system is weakest and where the next conflict, whether it's financial or physical, is most likely to erupt.
Something profound to mull over as we watch the year unfold. Thank you for diving deep with us. We'll be tracking every move.